Sorry, guys.
Oh, that's okay.
It's okay.
Hey, special guest. It's awesome.
This should be going live.
Is it the same link
Not.
to
No.
watch? Okay, so
Yeah.
not the same link to watch. Okay.
Okay, but she'll in the process, I'm sure of.
Okay, we're live now. Okay.
Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Hello,
Hey
live.
guys.
Hello.
Bree just tweeted it.
Okay.
I am retweeting.
So welcome. We have had some.
Hello.
I don't. All right.
We continue to have tech issues. Welcome, everybody. Whoa.
Oh my goodness.
Oh. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. We've had some technical difficulties today, but we are here. Welcome to my channel. My name is Bree. This is a live show for Robert Jackson Bennett. He is the author of the upcoming release, or recent release, City of Blades, and its book that is the sequel to City of Stairs. So we're going to go through, do some quick introductions, and then we will be asking Robert some questions. Nicole, do you want to start?
Sure. Hello, my name is Nicole. My channel is Nicole's Adventures in SFF, and I read mostly science fiction and fantasy books. If you guys have any questions, you can drop them, either tweet them at one of us, at Bree or at Robert, or you can drop them in the comments, in the sidebar comments on the YouTube watch page, and we'll be monitoring those. So, Thomas or Brock, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Brock. My channel is Let's Read, and I'm a longtime lover and reader of science fiction and fantasy.
Brock, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Thomas. I am with SFF 180, and I also have run the sfreviews.net website. This July, it will be 15 years.
And then Robert, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Robert Jackson Bennett. I'm a writer, and I'm happy to be here to take your questions.
Awesome. So who wants to ask the first question?
It's got to be somebody. I know I'm not that frightening. Well, I know I'm a little bit frightening. Okay, all right, I'll give you that.
Well, let's see. Okay, so your current work is the City of Blades, City of Stairs series. These are a fascinating hybrid of, I'd say, high mythology-inspired fantasy, dealing with deities and what have you, mixed with this sort of Jean le Carré political thriller type fiction, this behind the Iron Curtain kind of Eastern European sort of scenario. Having to do, and it brings up subjects like colonialism and what have you. Maybe you could talk a bit about the initial inspirations for this trilogy and your sort of creative process in combining these two kind of literary worlds and turning them into something very organic all on their own.
Sure. I had the idea because I really love spy stories. I really love the stories about how things work behind the walls of power. But I also love mythologies and gods and things like that. And I love the weirdo like dream logic that myths work by. I find it really fascinating. and also a little bit creepy. And I realized one day that both of these systems were devoted to defining reality for other people, controlling information, and choosing the world that we live in. And I found that really interesting that they crisscrossed in this sort of fashion. Like I do think that it's true that there are certain people of power in the world who, if they say a thing is true, then it is true, or if it's not true, then it is not true, and that has wide-ranging implications. So it was an interesting way to attack and interrogate how power works for people, was to sort of start off with this fun kind of capery sort of fantasy window and twist it all up with the spy angle and the way that we control information for other people and control like other people's lives and control the knowledge that they have about their own countries.
Because I think a big conflict that starts off the trilogy is this whole idea of the cultural erasure, where the conquerors are, have entirely banned the worship of, and these things that are deeply important to the cultural identity of the people they've conquered, and this never ends well.
Right.
When you try to do this, and so was there anything maybe like specifically, I guess, just that you were thinking of when you were sort of fictionalizing all of this kind of?
Well, the idea kind of came about, it was back in 2012 or 2013, and now I'm going to get all political, when the Texas Board of Education chose to edit all the school books in Texas. And these were not educators. I think it's headed up by a dentist who somehow got elected to the job. And they wanted to change like a whole lot of stuff about history. For example, Martin Luther King wasn't that important, and let's also make sure that we talk about the Black Panthers. Brand new words for slaves. Let's not talk about Allah at all. Let's not talk about the Muslim faith whatsoever. Let's make sure that everyone knows that America is first and foremost very Christian. And it was just this really interesting idea of like, let's try and change history as much as we can to make sure that history is correct from our perspective. And it was just kind of crazy that we were just, yeah, that's how it is. It is because that's how we say it is, and that's how it is. And like you say that that it never ends well. But what if it has ended well and we don't know it? What if, like, at some point in time, our idea of how reality works, and I'm sure that it's happened, has been altered or changed to fit a campaign, and it worked, and now we all buy it. And one or two people out there might be saying, this actually isn't true. This is something that like 2 or 3 people said was true, and now we all believe it. But we don't know, and to us, they sound like nut jobs. So.
History's written by the winners.
Yeah, history is written by the winners. So it was a really interesting way to look at it from that perspective, to look at some of those happening in my own state and in my own country, where we were deciding what reality was on a daily basis via votes by dentists.
I know exactly who you mean.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a question from the chat that I'll mention right away from Caleb Russell, and he asks, if I remember correctly, you did not intend for City of Stairs to become part of a series. What changed your mind? And then he also asks, how well did you adjust to writing in a secondary world?
So how it went about is I'd written City of Stairs, and it was about to come out, and it was getting a lot of good press and a lot of good reactions. And I wanted to write something completely different. I wanted to write like a science fiction story based in our own reality, this idea that I had about superheroes. And my editor was like, does he know what sort of a book he just wrote? Which is like this giant secondary world thing with a lot of mythologies. Does he know that people are going to want and expect a sequel? And I was like, I don't really write sequels, but I'll give it a shot. So I tried to write a prequel. And he was like, yeah, this is a young adult thing. And I realized that that I didn't want to write a sequel, not because I didn't want to write a sequel, because I didn't want to write a sequel to this book. Because Stairs ends on a high note. She's all like super inspired. She wants to go out and change the world, to pull all the levers of her country to affect things for the better. And I think we all know that that frequently does not work very well. That when you try and do too many changes, people shoot at you, or at the very least get incredibly upset, and do everything that they can to make sure that those changes don't take effect. And I knew that that was the natural step in this story, that she would go back home, try and make changes, and those changes would be tested on every single level. So I knew that I wanted to explore the story from that angle. Well, I didn't know that that's what I wanted to explore. I knew that that's what would happen. And the other thing that sucked was that at the end of Stairs, it became clear that Shara was going to become someone important. And people who are really important are usually not that interesting to watch, because there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of glad handing, there's a lot of memo writing, there's a lot of agendas and yada 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 yada. And so if you're actually in power, and unless you are combating people in that position of power, it's really not that interesting to follow. She's not going to shoot anybody. She's not going to jump out of an exploding building. That's not interesting. So I knew that if I really wanted to be honest with that world, then she also probably couldn't be the main character. And so, and I knew that I didn't want to have Sigurd be the main character, because in Stairs he is more or less unbreakable. And by that I mean not just that he seems unbreakable, but he is not someone who has a lot of doubt and uncertainty about what he's doing. He's not that invested, and he doesn't really care that much. And that's not an interesting main character. He hasn't gone through like enough change to inspire that doubt in him, to make him a good main character. And I do think that what makes a good main character is doubt. They have to have some question about themselves or the world that they're in. And Sigurd does not have a lot of questions, at least at the end of Stairs. So that kind of left me adrift, where I was like, I don't, this is a stage in this world that's going to be hard to write about, because it's going to be where things get hard, and I don't have a really good end yet. I don't know exactly who is the main character. And so I wrote this idea for the sequel that was featured a completely different set of characters that were totally new and yada yada yada, and I was not feeling it. And then there was a point in time in the story when I introduced General Mulagesh, and this was all in outline. And once she was on the page in my brain, I was like, I really like having her back. She was a lot of fun just to hang out with. And then slowly I was like, you know what? Why don't we just say screw it and make her the main character? And that's what happened. And as soon as I started writing her as the main character, it was just so much more fun, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. That was a lot of answers to a lot of questions, I think. But it just kind of organically all came together.
That's what we like to hear.
Good.
So with Mulagesh being the main character of City of Blades, I'm not going to get into the super details of it, but at the beginning of the story, she's very reluctant to kind of go and do the tasks that are assigned to her. And is it when you're willing to write a character into your story, is it hard to make them resist the story you want to put them into?
Not really, because the problem with her is that she's not stupid. She knows at the end of Stairs, she's like, this is going to be really hard, and she's quite aware that this is going to be a lot of bullshit. This is going to be a lot of crap that I don't really want to put up with. I've done this for 40 years, and I don't want to spend another year doing it. And having her be reluctant on that level, where she knows what this is about, she knows it's going to be hard, and she knows it's just a bunch of crap, was her natural reaction. She, like in Stairs, she's pretty reluctant from the start. But what was neat about her was I had a doorway into the past of Sepur that I didn't with Shara. With Shara, she's like 35 in Stairs, so she's still kind of young, and she still is. And her experience with Sepur has been limited since she's basically been in exile since she was 16. So it was really nice to have a main character who had lived through and fought in the wars that you sort of heard only in the distance in Stairs. So she has way, in some ways, way more insight into how the front lines really work. Shara is used to being around people who make the decisions, and Mulagesh is used to being around and being one of the people who has to carry those decisions out and see them be executed. And so those sorts of people usually tend to be more reluctant, more cynical, more jaded, with good reason. So that was a great way to inform her character.
One of the things I really liked about Mulagesh in the first book, but also in this newest one, is that she's very complex. You can tell in the first book that she's really very much thoughtful about what she's going to do and the people around her. But in the second book, you find out that she has this really dark kind of past going on for her. Did you want to write a book that was darker, and or is that just kind of a byproduct of Mulagesh's past and history?
I think a bit of both. I think that, usually the second in a story is when things get darker. It's The Empire Strikes Back. But also, I do think that this is when the most doubt sets in. Like in the first book, there's this wonderful land, and there are these people in it, and they've got problems, and the problems go back a long ways. And then there's a fight, and then they win, and then they set off to do things better. And then in the second book, or in the second stage of the story, is when they are forced to question, is this even possible for us to really pull off change? I mean, is this going to be, like, are we going to win? Is this something that we actually really want to win? Should we be reconsidering what we're doing? So by default, those questions are going to be a little bit darker, because suddenly you have to wonder about what you're doing and wonder about the realities of winning and what winning is going to look like. I think you start to realize once you're in that stage of a conflict that winning is probably not going to look like winning. Winning is going to take 20 or 30 years. You're probably not going to see that win. So I knew that if I want to be realistic about how I would expect these sorts of things to go, that just because of that, it would be a darker story. And also I do think that having Mulagesh be the main character works well because Sapur has always operated from a position of warfare. They've made war. They've owned these lands. They've owned these countries. They win just by being strong. And now Shara is asking them to change and to be something different. And it made sense to have the person struggling the most with that question be a soldier, be a warrior, and have someone be like, this is what I've known my whole life, and now you're asking me to be something new. And I knew that I wanted to have that main character there, have it be a soldier, have them being asked if they can change. And I was like, so this question is hard for them. It's hard for them to change. But why is it hard for them to change? And of course, the sort of game that I've been playing throughout the series is that, well, because I worry that deep down I'm just like them, and that I'm just like all the Continentals. And of course, then you have to wonder, well, how are you like them? In the first book, you see how they try to control the stories and the history of the continent, just like how the continent controlled them and got rid of all their languages and things like that, and controlled their reality. So in the second book, when it came down to warfare, and it was the question of how are you just like them, I knew that there had to be something dark in their history. And I remember, like, I was wondering what had happened in her past, who she was, how that fight had gone. And I was vacuuming, which is when I have most of my good ideas. And I had my earphones in, and the soundtrack to Ken Burns' A Civil War came on. And I remember one of the stories in that has always struck me the most is Sherman's March to the Sea, where he just marches through Georgia and through the Deep South and just burns everything. And he has a line that he says is that war is hell, and we shouldn't screw around about it. If you really want to do it, it's not civilized, it's not pretty. We need to just go in and do it and break them. And on one level he's wrong, because we don't want that to be true. But on the other level, yeah, that's absolutely true. And that, like, this sort of conflict, it's really hard to impose rules on these sorts of things. You have to wonder if there is such a thing as a civilized war, if such a thing has existed or ever will exist. And yeah, so I really wanted to start to look at those questions, and the more I looked at them, the darker it got. But yeah, like it was kind of funny because folks were like, Stairs was really light, and I was like, Stairs had like genocide in it, and so, I mean, it was like it took place in the past, but it did have like genocide in it. So we look at that history a little bit more in this, in which you actually get to meet the people who did those genocides, and yeah, so by nature, I mean, like the history has always been dark. It's just that in Blades we look at the history a little bit closer and see what it has actually done to these people.
So I had a question kind of about your body of work in general, not just City of Stairs and City of Blades, and that is that you tend to like to kind of blend genres and sort of blend inspirations, and even as you were talking about your inspiration now, that seemed as like something that kind of came out. So, like, where do you get your ideas from? Is it just something that happens in everyday life and you just see things? And like, how do you make the decision to, mix and match so many different elements from so many different genres?
I really don't know what the hell I'm doing. That's the honest answer. The probably smarter sounding answer is that I have questions about things and about how I think about things, and I like to pursue and follow those questions. And sometimes to do that, you need tools from different places. So I'll take a little bit of fantasy over here, and a little bit of spy and stuff over here, and some Civil War over here, and some ancient mythologies over here, and just sort of put together a big weirdo contraption to help me get to the place to ask the questions that I need to ask. It is not pre-planned. I don't think of it as actually that genre bendy. I think that there's like magic and stuff and aliens and all sorts of crazy crap. So to me, it's not that genre bendy. But maybe I don't know. Maybe there's just something wrong with me. I don't know.
So P.T. Hilton actually, as I was asking my question in the chat, had a similar question. His question was, I'm curious your experience writing in multiple genres, and is there a lot of crossover in readership between like the fantasy books, the City of Stairs, City of Blades, and like American Elsewhere, or The Troop, or your other sort of books? And I guess maybe, how does your editor feel about writing in so many different genres? Is that something that you have difficulty pitching to him?
Well, I got a new editor when I did Stairs, and
okay.
But yeah, there's not a whole lot of crossover because before Stairs there really wasn't an audience. I had people who read and liked my stuff and have followed me to Stairs, but it's been a much smaller audience. And when I wrote Stairs, suddenly people who had known about me and had heard stuff about me, but had never actually read me, they've been like, I heard about that book, but I haven't read that book. When I wrote Stairs, suddenly they read it and they were like, hey, I like your stuff, and I was like, dude, it's been like 4 years, and now you like me. So I don't know. I think throwing in a sword and some magic is just just an invitation to certain audiences to check me out. So maybe in the future, I'm just gonna have a hell of a lot of swords and a hell of a lot of magic. I don't know. It seems to work. There's sort of a cargo cult thing going on where like I don't know what's causing the success, but I know like the picture of success. If I try and look like that picture, maybe I'll have that success. And it kind of seems to be working, which is a surprise. But yeah, that's pretty much how I would describe it, with that rambling, disjointed ramble.
Kind of building off that question, talking about your past in publishing, you've written quite a few books now. Is there anything that you've kind of learned along the way that you wish you had known kind of as you were starting out?
It's a long haul. It's not. There's certain people who get a career in 1 or 2 books, but really, what actual success in writing looks like is that you build up a pretty dense backlist of books that have earned out 4+, not 1+, not 2+, but 4 to 5 books that have earned back the advance, and that's what success looks like. Is that you're getting little bits of money from a whole lot of books every couple of months. That's the business side of it. But yeah, I really would have liked to have heard some of the business side of it when I first started out. One thing, like I think I came into publishing at a weird era. Because I came in right before the bottom fell out of the economy, and then right after that was when we lost Borders, and then ebooks took off, And like when I first got into publishing, they were like, "You're a horror writer," and I was like, "I don't think I write horror. I thought I wrote like fantasy." And they were like, "No, horror's gonna take off. Horror's gonna be a thing. It's gonna be a really big thing." And then horror wasn't a thing, and I had to kind of rebuild myself. And yeah, I just there is this idea of a brand about what you write, and there's a line, I think it's from oh, I can't remember his name. He's wrote Hyperion. Dan
Simmons.
Yeah, he wrote a line about how some writer said to him, you got to make your slide and grease it. That you got to get, your runway of stuff that you do that people expect from you, and just keep doing that thing. And he was like, and that's the worst advice I've ever heard. And now I'm like, that's actually maybe kind of good advice. Maybe because I do think that people have expectations for what you want to do, and you got to play within those expectations and challenge yourself to do the things that you want to do while still kind of doing the things that they expect. That is a grim and cynical truth, but I do think that it is a truth worth paying attention to. And then,
sorry.
Well, and then once you get famous enough, you can just say screw it, and make them do whatever you want. Yeah, and make them eat dirt. And be like, don't you like this dirt? And they'll be like, yes, I do, because you're famous.
That might be a good lead into my next question, and there might be a preamble to this, and sorry if it's too long. But so you've clarified tonight and then also in previous interviews that City of Stairs is about power and exploring the void left when power is all of a sudden vacated. In the first book, my impression was that it was about religion, very specifically about religion. And then after reading that interview, it was more like, okay, well, it's power. There's a bigger, grander theme to that as well. And the second book, my comment would be the second book looks like it shies away from that a little bit. Or rather than, it doesn't shy away, but I would say that it feels like the theme has been refined to explore that broader theme of power specifically. Whereas the first book, and this is the fault of me, the reader, thinking, oh, it's just about religion. The second book feels like it's about more than that. Was that a conscious choice to downplay those elements, or was it just like a natural progression?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like in Blades, you do have the afterlife and a god actually saying you need to do these horrible things to come into my afterlife. And I do think that one of the things that I really did want to explore in Blades is that I think not a lot, but a significant amount of the reason why I think certain people believe in religion is because they are frightened of death and they want to have a space after death. And I wanted to, and that was something that I was thinking about in Stairs while I was writing it, where I was like, so Saepuris don't go anywhere after they die. They just die. They're over. And how do the Continentals feel now they don't have that afterlife? And how do the Saepuris feel about how the Continentals feel about not having an afterlife? Like, well, we never had one, chumps. So now you got to deal with what we've been dealing with all this time. But yeah, I do think that I wanted to broaden that theme out a little bit and look at and try and pull that sense of religious, I don't know, that sense of being owed. I did everything that you asked. I did everything you wanted. It was really hard. So I should get that thing that you said I would get. And I do think that there's a lot in common with that with soldiers, in that, like if I serve my nation and then sacrifice for my nation and see my friends sacrifice, I should get that nation that I fought for. But this isn't what this looks like, and I don't like it. And or y'all have just forgotten me. Now you say that I'm a monster. I did what you said. Now though those guys all got voted out, now we got this noob guys in here, and now I'm the bad guy. What happened? So that was this aspect that I wanted to look at, this idea of cultural shift, in which those who are used to wielding power no longer have it, or are rebranded as the bad guys.
So I guess in terms of, in the same vein of being inspired, I guess, by actual historical trends and cultural trends, you also have some specific characters that are based on historical individuals. To what degree when you're telling a story with these kinds of themes, is that helpful to you to sort of to construct a character in that way versus a character entirely from your imagination, or is this something that you actually find easy to do frequently? Do you usually take elements of real historical people and put them in your characters? For example, like Sigrid, being based on I think Peter Freuchen, who is a Danish explorer.
Yeah.
Or was that just sort of a bit of a creative whim that you thought would be just something fun to plug into the story and give it that extra element of depth?
Well, there's more women in it than I think I'd like to admit. But yeah, I do look at reality a lot for where I get my my inspiration from. Mostly because reality is way more interesting than anything that I could make up. The fact that dude made a knife out of his own poop to cut his way out of a sheet of ice is just ridiculous. Like if I wrote that, everyone would be like, "That's the stupidest damn thing," and they would be right to say it. But yeah, I knew that when I wanted to write Sigurd, I wanted to have him be this unbelievable death machine that's just ridiculous. Like I don't believe this, but I could be like, well, they got the poop knife guy who was like 6.5 feet tall and the giant fur coat and his little tiny wife. He just really, and there's that sense of this sort of man existed at the turn of the century, this brave explorer, and we just don't have those anymore. It's a lost breed. In reality, they were probably assholes. We just don't like assholes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I absolutely do think that I pull from reality. I pull from the past, the present. I don't think I pull from the future. That'd be awesome if I did. And like I look at history, and like for example, lots of Bulgakov is pulled from Constantinople.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of stuff is pulled from the Cold War as well, as everyone knows. There's some dashes of, like when I was writing Stairs was when Syria was really just starting to go on, and everybody had questions about what are we going to do. Then as it turned out, the answer was nothing, or really just not that much. Maybe not nothing, but close to nothing. That doesn't really matter.
Yeah, sit back in your hands.
Yeah, and I was really thinking, when I wrote Stairs, that I really wanted to have a lot more intercontinental conflict between the various states that are still there. And then I realized that that'd be way too complicated, and I just really didn't want to do it. And that's something we see now today in Syria. For a joke, at Confusion, I hosted a presidential debate with a bunch of science fiction and fantasy authors where they were competing for the genre caucus. And one of the running jokes I had was there was a bunch of really silly questions, should we open carry magic missile on unseen campus universities, things like that. But for author Wes Chu, he got real-world questions like, how do you stop ISIS? And I actually researched what's going into ISIS and the depths, because I knew some of it, but when I had to actually frame what's happening right now with ISIS, I was like, I'm going to be talking for 4 minutes, just with all the different factionalisms happening there. And so I had this choice at one point where I was like, do I want to put this much factionalism into my stories? And I was like, I don't want to draw those maps. That would really suck. So I just did, continent, say we got some minor stuff happening internally in both regions. But besides that, I don't want it to be too realistic because reality is complicated, boring, and exhausting.
It is that.
Yeah.
It occurs to me that if Leonardo DiCaprio does not win the Oscar this time, he's going to kick himself and say, I should have killed the bear with a poop knife. Why didn't I do...
Well, it's actually kind of interesting.
Only would have taken that.
Yeah, because he was actually looking at working on my first book, way back in the day, which was Mr. Shivers, which is about a bunch of hobos in the 1930s out in the desert starving and killing each other. And so now I'm starting to get, I'm like, you have a pet theme here that you were building up to. You just found one that did it better, of just misery in the wilderness. Mine was too civilized for your tastes. That's what I tell myself at night.
So one of the interesting things that I
I found out when I was reading some of the interviews that you've done before is that Mulagish, it was originally written as a man. And I thought this was really interesting because your books overall feature quite a few women. Was there a reason that you thought that Mulagish just felt better as a man, or
as a woman?
Why concentrate power in your female characters?
Well, for one thing, it's interesting. What happened was, at that stage in Stairs, I knew that Shara had to meet up with the local, really actual, authorities. Because, like in her first scene, she meets the diplomat who's an idiot and runs just a complete shit show of an embassy. And she just steamrolls over him. And I knew that at some point in time she had to be she had to do actual work to work with the local, authorities. And I was going to have her meet a local, a colonel, and it was going to be, sort of a fat, kind of a blustering old man, this old war hero with the big mustache, blah blah blah. And then I was like, this is boring. A, because she's already done something like this, and B, because she's not really having to work. And suddenly, I was like, how do I make this guy more interesting? Should I make him a love interest? She already kind of has a love interest. I don't want to tear away from that. And then suddenly I was like, why don't you just make her a middle-aged, highly competent woman who suffers fools poorly and is not going to tolerate Shara's shit? And when I had that idea, suddenly I was like, I like this. And something that I'd realized was that, of the characters who are with Shara a lot, not too many of them test her. Like, Sigrid is totally silent. Pitri, of course, is basically, just her gopher. So I had to have someone there to look her in the eye and say, no, this is stupid. And if you really want to do this, you're going to have to actually explain this to me. And I really liked having her be that character. I do think that I think that the way that she flows into Blades works extremely well. And that I think that if you didn't know in Stairs that she was a secondary character, someone would be like, someone's writing him, classic tropey strong female character. She's buff and she swears a lot and she smokes. But at the same time, that feels very natural for her. And but I think what's nice is in Blades is that you get to see that she's actually very fragile. And she's trying very hard to convince herself that she's still strong.
All right, I'm gonna go back and pull another question from the chat, and so
Okay.
This is on a totally different track. It is, what would you be doing if you weren't writing full-time career-wise?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I basically committed to let's be a professional writer when I was 21. That's not the best idea. I do think nowadays, since I've worked in the business sector and done some management stuff, that if I had a choice, I would like to work in clean energy because I think that's a really cool area. I think there's a lot of new stuff happening there. If you are aware, our Congress just extended tax credits for wind and solar. So we're going to see some remarkable growth over the next 5 to 10 years, if not more. And yeah, it's just a really cool area and something that I care about. Sorry, there's a little dog trying to eat a chicken nugget off of a table over there. Yeah, it's
you stop
cool
the
and it's
little dog?
interesting. Yeah, that's the dog that smells bad. That might be why he smells bad. Yeah, did I answer your question? I think I did for the dog. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's something that's cool, and I really like spreadsheets. They're a lot of fun.
I really like spreadsheets too.
There are a lot there. I mean, yeah, I love pivot tables. It's just there's so much you can do with them. It's fantastic.
All right. We also had someone asked a question about your social media presence too, mentioning that you've recently reached 4,000 Twitter followers. But so in general, you want to talk a little bit about social media and how you try and continue your author presence on social media, I guess.
Yeah, I do think that social media is something that I do for fun. I think that if you're not enjoying something that someone's seeing, if you're like, I'm just doing this because I want you to buy my crap, then it's not fun for them either. And with social media, I take pains to I don't take pains. I want to make sure that I'm having fun while I do it. And this usually means that I tweet a bunch of weird crap and a bunch of really stupid jokes, or tweet at Mike Cole about a bunch of weird stuff. And actually, I think that today, Fantasy Faction, I don't know why they did this, but they like trawled through my feed for like years and found like the top 17 tweets, and like they could have just gone to like Favestar and looked at my tops, but instead they found ones that only like one or two people had like faved that I guess they really liked, and I'm pretty sure it was Olivia Mead, who is with my UK publisher, Joe Fletcher Books, who did it. But anyway, God bless her. I don't know why someone would submit themselves to that. But yeah, there's a lot of people who just don't believe that I'm like a serious author, and that's fine. And there's certain people who think that I'm trolling my fans, which I am, because I mean, there's this urge that if you follow me on like social media, that you're gonna find out who I am, that you're gonna understand my books more, or like what it's like to be an artist more. And I like to, you know, have someone follow me, and I just tweet about, you know, what if ducks were in the mafia?
Or the dog is eating a chicken nugget.
Or the dog is eating a chicken nugget. Yeah, sometimes you don't have to make. Once again, reality outdoes my brain.
Well, I think the Mafia Ducks has potential.
Mafia Ducks. I'm telling you, it does. Yeah.
It should be a kid's book or something. A little bit dark, maybe, for a picture book.
Yeah, I do think. Yeah, ducks having to dissolve one another's like bodies in tanks of acid.
Okay.
I know that I read. I think that actually Daniel Polanski wrote like a novella with a bunch of like live animals killing each other. The builders. I think.
Yeah, it's like Martin Scorsese doing Watership Down, basically.
Yeah.
These mallards sleep with the fishes.
Yeah.
Ducks and the Godfeather.
The Godfeather, very nice.
I'm sorry. I'll mute myself forever now. I'm sorry.
So one of the things that you mentioned earlier tonight was about how you hadn't been planning to write a sequel, and so but it was something that was kind of expected in the fantasy world right now with how publishing is, and you're writing now another book in the world, I believe, that's going to be following Sigrud. Was that something that you had planned to do, like you were writing the second book and you were like, oh, you know what, I have to follow this character through to the end, or is this something like your publisher came to you and was like, you can't stop now?
No. I mean, like, basically, once I committed to a second, I knew that a third had to be in there. You know, it's a lot easier to go back to contract for two books rather than one. But by that point, once I realized that I wanted to write about Mulagesh, suddenly, because in the first book in Stairs, there's sort of a trifecta. There's her, there's Sigrud, and then there's Mulagesh. And they're the ones making crap happen in Bulakov. And so Mike Cole is texting me, and it's irritating. And so it almost looks like I planned this, even though I didn't. Where, you know, and so I do think that they sort of form a triad in which, and this is because, well, first I'll say what makes them the like triad is that Shara, her story is very cerebral. And that she's about the brains and the minds and the history of the continent and trying to think her way out of a situation. And with Mulagesh, her story is very much about the moral case for what she's doing. She's about trying to do what's right or what she thinks is right in the face of reason. And with Sigrud, his story is going to be about the like emotional level, which is I think really unusual. In that, you know, in the first book he's like not emotional at all, and then by the third book, it's about, you know, about a lot of things. But his is about what these wars have done to people and how they manage to try and put their lives together. And this comes to me because when I was taking a class on rock and roll in college, our college professor explained the 60s as saying, like, well, like it had a triad. There was the Beatles, who were the brains, and then there was Bob Dylan, who was the heart, and the Rolling Stones were the dick. And that stuck with me, where I was like, you got to have that triad of three different aspects all trying to view this one perspective, this one like event. And so I think it kind of works well for the Divine Cities, in which you look at this long ongoing struggle through three different points of view. And so you see that Shara sometimes she doesn't look that good from the point of view of Mulagesh, and Sigrid looks like someone completely different from her point of view as well. And you get to see how they age and how they struggle with children and with their ongoing problems in their own lives. It's fun.
So in a rare, kind of leading off that with the trilogy aspect, in a rare moment of Twitter clarity, you got away from the humor and you had a tweet about how that you had finished, or I don't know if it was the first draft, final draft, but you had finished the book and the process of writing a trilogy was exhaustive or exhausting. How, since you've already written 3 books in a row and then had to go and do a trilogy, how did you find that harder or more difficult, or what challenges did you face writing, say, like a single book versus committing to 3 books in a row?
I guess it's because you get to see how folks live after the words the end show up, and you get to see what happened to Shara after Stairs and Mulagesh after Blades, and you get to see what happened to their kids and what happens to their friends and things like that, where you get to see them get old. And it's like, having friends get old, where you don't see them for a while and you step back and you're like, holy shit, you got old. And like, you don't, and like hearing them say stuff that you wouldn't expect them to say, where you're like, you're not nearly as optimistic as you used to be. What the hell happened to you? And then there's folks that you kind of had forgotten about for a while, and you swing back in and talk to them, and you think suddenly, I thought you were like a nobody. I was just nice to you, but now here you are, and you're doing really well, and you've got a lot of smart things to say. I'm really happy to see this. This is great. This is great for me to see. So it's both uplifting and also sort of downbeat, because you get to see people get old and see them get resigned to the paths in front of them and realize that they're going to be stepping away from this world at some point, which is unusually challenging. I think that what is interesting about my books is, or at least for this series, as it goes on, it gets more adult. And by that I mean not like there's boobs or murder, but that they start to worry about things like, am I leaving a good world behind? Am I really thinking of these people on either side of me in the best terms that I can? Where they start to gain a perspective on life that I think when you're in your 20s and when you're 30s you don't have. And those questions get hard. And it's been interesting to see them try and struggle with it. And like I said, it's both uplifting and also a little bit downbeat. And yes, exhausting.
Building off that, Caleb Russell asks, how many drafts do you go through before you're satisfied with the novel?
Yeah, it's not really like that. It's not like I'm like, all right, there's one draft, and then I go back. Usually what happens is I write it, and then I let it sit for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I go back and I edit it. And usually by the time that, like in that period, I'm thinking back, and I'm like, this scene, I don't know. Like, why am I doing this, or why am I doing that? And I start to feel where scenes and where the arc of the story is weak. And when I go through that edit is when I start to ask some hard questions about, is this really working? Why am I doing this? Why is the talking pie the sidekick? And then once I feel like I've got into solid enough shape, and I've cut all of that and the and then, I send it to my agent. She reads it. She sends it back with comments. I send it to my editor. Well, first I take those comments into account. Then I send it off to my editor. He sends me a whole lot of comments. I send him back. I usually don't fight with him that much. Usually if someone says that something's wrong, there's something wrong. And it really depends on the someone. There's some people that you should ignore all the time, forever. But my editor I take seriously, and my agent I take seriously. and when they say like this doesn't feel right, usually I have to think on it for a bit and say like here's why it doesn't feel right, because this person just went through this experience, and when we see them leave the scene, it's from someone else's point of view rather than their own point of view, and we don't get to see how they feel about this experience and how it informs their arc through the story. It's we feel weirdly removed from what's happening, or whatever, and then I make those changes and send it back to my editor. If I'm lucky, he sends me just a handful of things back, and I take care of those. If I'm not lucky, it's another big old thing, and I got to make those changes and send it back. And then usually things look pretty good by then, and then we take it to the next level, and we start getting things formatted. And in the UK, we start adding all those U's to the O's. But yeah, sometimes it can be really hard. With like Blades, for example, I realized that the way that I had set up the conflict with the main antagonist was unusually passive. And because it was passive, you know, usually when you write the sorts of stories that I do, which are kind of structured like a mystery, in which something's happened, we don't know what's happening, we got to find out what's happening, they start to follow a trail. And because in the first draft of Blades there was no trail, she just kind of wandered around for like the first third of the book, just bumping into crap. And in the first draft of Blades, it had way more action, and Mulagesh did way more badass stuff, really cool stuff, killed a shitload of people. And then my editor was like, yeah, there's a lot of great action, but I think that the reason why you're putting all this action in there is because you don't have a firm grasp on where the story wants to go. And I was like, oh my god, he's right. And so I totally redid the entire plot structure of the first third of Blades and cut about 40,000 words from it. And I did this in the space of about 2 weeks. And it's a much better novel for it. I think he was absolutely right.
So
Yeah,
about
that's,
how long does your writing process take, like, as you went through it? Because you've been putting out about a book a year, which is pretty regularly. So, like, how long from start to finish does it take you to put out a book? And do you do, like, all your books back to back, or do you have, like long rests, or is it just kind of, like, constantly writing things?
Well, it feels like I'm constantly writing things. I don't know if that's actually true. I'd say it takes you about 5 to 6 months to complete a first draft, maybe. And then it usually takes me 3 to 4 months to do all the editing for with my editor and my agent. And then usually once that's done, I'm bored, and I want to start writing the next thing and proposing the next thing and hopefully getting paid for the next thing. And one of the things that's really a great inspiration for this is the IRS, because you owe tax season. You owe a third of your income as a writer to the IRS. So when April rolls around, you're like, holy shit, I got to write another book to pay off that book that I got paid for. And then it just keeps cycling. And then it's like a Ponzi scheme where you're writing books to pay off the books that you paid off to write other books. Anyway, so yeah, the IRS is a tremendous inspiration to me as a writer and as an American.
So we have a question about how you balance scenes that are a little bit more mundane and then they transform into something more epic. Specifically, how do you find the inspiration for those and the balance between them and the more normal scenes?
I love to write stuff that's just mundane because usually it's funny. I usually try and make it kind of funny, where it's like this petty little thing that's kind of irritating, or these two people sort of kind of fighting, and then slowly in the background something crappy starts happening. For example, there's the part in Stairs where the monster has like escaped the jar, and then these two dudes that are like sitting in the ice shack fishing, and having them fight back and forth and slowly be like, is there something down there? And realizing there's a horrible monster stuck to the ice right below them. That's funny. I mean, like, and so that's a fun way to do that. And there's like some people who are like, I don't like your politics in these scenes. I don't like how it's all like kind of like mundane and no one's getting stabbed. But for me, I love writing that stuff because to me it's funny. It's a fun little scene to write. So that's usually how I go into it, is that I try and find something that to me is like amusing and also true to what's happening in the story, where these two people have a petty little problem and then in the background, there's this horrible monster slowly walking up on them. It's fun to watch.
So, kind of winding down now, do you mind telling us what you're reading right now? Maybe both novel and then you're known for reading some poetry and talking about poetry, so maybe some of the poetry you've been into lately?
It's been a while since I read poetry. I've been reading a lot of history recently, and I read, and I don't think I can say anything too interesting on this. I read Venice, a new history, and I'm reading Alexander Hamilton, the biography by Chertow. I just inhale, like I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently, and one that I've been listening to a lot is Revolutions, which is fantastic. You should hear about it's worth it just for hearing about the French Revolution and all the crazy crap that went on in the French Revolution, which was very inspirational to me. And that's kind of sucked up a lot of my time recently. Podcasts, 5 years ago, I was like, this is stupid. No one will ever like these. And now I just can't stop inhaling these things. I have to admit, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a writer as well, where I was like, I feel bad when I read a friend's stuff because a lot of times I don't like it, but it's not because I don't like his stuff, it's just because fiction doesn't do it for me anymore. And he was like, yeah, I can't read fiction anymore. I just can't do it because that part of my brain is kind of like calloused. And the stuff that used to work on it, now I see what it is. I can see all the strings on the puppet, and it doesn't work anymore. So I've got to do new stuff, find new things to do to my brain to get that high again. And I guess podcasts are it. Lots of TV, lots of not so much movies, because once you're an adult, there's a plus $100 fee to go see the movies for the babysitter cost. So it's got to be a hell of a good movie if you want to go see it. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. It's got to be amazing. And it usually isn't. Like when they were like, let's go see The Revenant. And I was like, I don't know if I want to take my wife to a $150 evening to see dudes hacking off each other's limbs in the woods. Like, I don't know if I can sell her on that one. So, yeah, there's a lot of TV, lots of podcasts, just an exceptional amount of podcasts these days. And, yeah, I wish I could do more fiction. I wish I could do the things that used to work. But, yeah, I can't do it anymore. Oh, well.
Ooh.
Is there any fiction that you used to love that you can recommend? And also poetry. We should not forget poetry.
Poetry. Yeah, there was one poet that I was really into when I started talking about the poetry that I was reading, and now I can't remember them. And that makes me a real piece of crap. So maybe I was just saying it to sound more, literary than I am.
More, right.
Yeah, I'm like, of course I read poetry.
Yeah.
Have you read Eunoia by Christian Book?
No. I'm sorry. One of the things that I think is really funny about writers is that, like, some writers whose stuff I don't think is that great are incredibly well read. I'm like, wow, you read all this like Russian literature and like all this history, and your books, and like you're a great conversation partner, but your books are just not that interesting. And then some writers, you're like, your books are so fascinating. What do you read? And they're like, I play video games all day. And you're like, oh, huh.
Yeah, just the disillusionment, just.
Yeah. And I am here to disillusion you thoroughly.
Yeah.
And admit that,
So you're not poring over any original manuscripts in the British Library and
No.
That Middle English illuminated.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, it was that joke from Friends about how I think Rachel tried to date a gynecologist, and he came home and he was like, you're a waitress, right? Have you ever had a day where you're like, if I see one more coffee cup, and like that's kind of how I am with books, where like I like. It's got to be really good for me to finish it. And the highest compliment that I can get from a writer these days that means a lot to me is if like a writer says to me, I finished your book. That means something. Because most writers that I talk to don't finish like 90% of the stuff they read. Because I think to a certain extent their brains are trawling for new stuff that they can steal. And if there's nothing new there, they're like, this isn't worth it. I got to go on to the next thing. Yeah, that's a really great compliment. It means there's something in what I'm doing that is worth stealing.
So you've just finished the manuscript for City of Miracles, I think is the name.
Yep.
Fantastic. When can we expect to see that on the shelves?
2017 sometime. I think like spring of 2017. It's going to be, it is a lot of fun. There's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of explosions, and it's very emotional, as one would expect of the third. But it is a lot of fun to write it from the point of view of Sigrud and have him sort of adopt a new family of, like a ragtag bunch of misfits. And having to deal with people is a lot of fun. But there's a lot of scenes where he gets into some sort of absurd situation, like crazy-ass action sequence. And this line keeps coming up where he goes, "This is not what I wanted." And it's just a lot of fun to write. And it's a little bit more Jason Bourne style, where it's him as he sort of, where you get to go and see Gallaudet and Afghanistan and things like that. See these places that you've heard about that are much more civilized, much more advanced than the rest of the books. But it all ends, of course, in Bulakov, as it should.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Sounds like
I like to think so. I think so.
And are you already thinking ahead to the next thing, or is that inspiration just going to hit you when it hits you?
I'm thinking ahead to it. I don't know if I'm going to get there, but I don't know if I'm going to get paid for it. But I'm thinking ahead to it.
Okay.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We have eaten up your hour, and we really appreciate you coming on and joining us on a live show here. Is this the first live show you've ever done?
I think so.
Very cool. Well, an extra honor for us.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks very much. It's been wonderful to talk with you.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for those of you who are watching for joining us. All of the links will be posted in the down bar for everyone you've seen here, for the books we've been talking about, when this gets archived. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and we'll see you later. Bye.
So long.
So long.
Adios.
Adios.